Bonjour à tous, c'est un test des microphones de la salle W.
Good afternoon, everyone. Does this work? I'd really love to do this without people having to put their, I guess not.
It's working.
It's working? Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am particularly grateful that you all are hanging in there and still with us this afternoon. We will be efficient this afternoon, in part because several of us have airplanes to catch. But this topic is in part about efficiency, and so we're going to be efficient. My name is Susan Schwab. I am the chair of the board of the National Foreign Trade Council, which is the oldest trade association, business association in the United States, devoted to free and fair trade. We also focus on supply chains, national security and trade, and international tax matters. We're delighted to be here as actually a group of companies. I'm delighted to be here with a group of companies this week who've been engaged in a variety of meetings and panels, and it's always a pleasure to be in Geneva. Much more fun for me than when I was USTR, but that's another story. Today, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and supply chains. And I'm going to do a brief introduction of our panel, but their bios are in the WTO program entry for this panel, so you can get the details. But it is a terrific panel. And after my introductory remarks, I'll be asking them a series of questions. I'll start out with one question for each, and then hopefully ask some questions that will get more of a dialogue going. And then I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. Brief introduction of our panel. Ashutosh Chadha, who is the Senior Director for UN Affairs and International Organizations from Microsoft. Alyssa Albin, Vice President and Head of Global Innovation, Trade Policy, and International Government Relations at Pfizer. WTO Director General, Johanna Hill, and Torbjorn Fredriksson, Head of the E-commerce and Digital Economy Branch at UNCTAD. Did I pronounce it right? Almost. Oh, okay. All right, cool. So our topic today, as I said, is AI supply chains that involve a lot of data. And we want to explore how AI tools and policies can increase supply chain efficiency, resiliency, and opportunities for global collaboration. We also want to look at some of the pitfalls and some of the concerns associated with AI and supply chains in global trade, including concerns associated with smaller businesses or smaller economies. And we want to address that as well. AI and supply chains combine two of the hottest topics around today. And what they have in common, among other things, is the importance of large, increasing amounts of data. In the case of AI, that's pretty obvious, the amounts of data involved. In the case of supply chains, that may be less obvious. And I think that is worth spending a little time on. Supply chains increasingly involve data for a variety of reasons, but two main ones that I think it's worth considering, whether we're talking about manufacturing or we're talking about agribusiness, for example. Both of these sectors generate and optimize and require large amounts of data to track, use, and interconnect with supply chains. The regulators, in the meantime, are adding more and more requirements on, supply chains that require individual manufacturers or farmers up and down the line in supply chains to keep track of things, keeping track of human rights issues or deforestation or carbon content, national security issues. And so between the data that is generated in manufacturing processes and the data that is required by governments and regulators, we find that this is a data-rich environment, shall we say. And so data flows, when it comes to supply chains and movement of goods, become an inevitable issue associated with AI. Now, this isn't, interestingly enough, this isn't really a big tech issue. This is an issue that will impact, if it isn't already impacting, but certainly will impact everyone up and down a supply chain. Small businesses, small economies, big businesses, big economies. Anyone who wants to engage in any part of these supply chains, you can't be a manufacturer today, or let's say tomorrow, a successful manufacturer in many cases, without having a supply chain, or without having a digital component and a cross-border digital component associated with your manufacturing. And this is, again, where supply chains and AI can come into the picture. And so this is why, for example, the WTO moratorium on customs duties and e-commerce becomes that much more important, whether it's, larger economies, smaller economies, richer economies, poorer economies. And it's also why managing these vast amounts of data and regulating these data these data and the AI applications and creating ecosystems that are harmonized sufficiently so that they talk to each other and there aren't restrictions in the movement that creates silos that inhibit businesses from small, medium, large businesses, small, medium, large economies from interacting with each other becomes so important. And here we're talking about sort of your data policy ecosystem that becomes so important, and how economies go about regulating has a fundamental importance on whether or not their industries are going to be able to engage in these supply chains when it comes to AI. ChatGPT was launched in 2022. And just to give you a sense of how unprecedented all of this is, when ChatGPT was adopted, it took 60 days to reach 100 million users. The pace of adoption is unprecedented. This 60 days compares to 7 years for the internet to reach 100 million users. So again, this is technology moving faster than the pace of government and faster than the pace of regulations, and risking regulations spilling over into areas where unexpected, unanticipated consequences could occur. So how do we go about moving ahead? I think this is really the key set of questions that we need to ask our panel today. What's the potential? What are the risks? How do we go about thinking of ecosystems in this context that can interact with each other, that mitigate against risks and open up the potential so that we are addressing issues like the issues we're talking about throughout this conference of accessibility, that do not exacerbate the digital divide, but in fact enable smaller companies and smaller economies to be fully engaged in global trade and in these supply chains. So let me start raising some questions with our panel here. And I think I'm going to start with Ashutosh. And Microsoft obviously has been a leader in developing AI tools and models. And in your role, you know a whole lot about the technology, but also about the government relations and the regulatory side of this equation. Can you sort of kick us off today with an overview of some of the key concepts in AI, and how AI tools can help build efficiencies and resilience when it comes to supply chains?
Thanks, Susan. And you actually made my job quite a bit easy with your initial talk. So AI isn't new, actually, if you really look at it. Am I audible? Okay, perfect. So AI isn't new, really. It's been around for a long, long time. And fundamentally, when we look at AI, the goal of AI is to it's a field which seeks to create intelligent machines, which can, work like us to a certain extent, right? Within that, we've heard of concepts like machine learning, which is basically a subset of AI that enables machines to learn from data and do some analysis. And then there is deep learning, which actually applies neural networks to that to analyze further data. But what's interesting is what Susan talked about, what we've seen in the last year and a half or so, which is something called generative AI. And the difference in generative AI that generative AI brings to the table today is that it can actually create new written, visual, auditory content for us to absorb. And that's the tipping point. The tipping point, because as Susan said, that it took 7 years for 100 million people to get onto the internet. If I really look at it, it took roughly Netflix 3.5 years for 1 million users. And it took ChatGPT just 5 days for 1 million users. Why was that? That was because it was so easy to engage with it. And the way I would look at it is that before that, AI was in the realm of possibly governments, enterprises, and large organizations. Today, AI is in the hand of each one of us. And that's what makes it strong. And when you add on top of that conversational AI, which is happening now, which means I can talk in my language to my phone or to my laptop and ask it for some information, and it replies back in my language, auditory-wise, it makes it far more accessible, right? And that means it comes into the hands of every person. That's why it's exploded so much, and that's why the opportunity that it defines for us is far greater. And when we look at supply chains, which is the point in time over here, what does any organization do? An organization could be big, small, and even an individual. We're talking about the gig economy today. You plan, you procure your raw material, you produce it, and you deploy it. And then further, you also monitor it. So for example, if there's a refrigerator today in your house, something goes wrong, you pick up the phone, you talk to someone, they monitor it if it's on the internet, and they try and correct it. Otherwise, they send an engineer home, hopefully, right? But that's the entire cycle of a supply chain. And when we look at that entire cycle of a supply chain, artificial intelligence can actually help you address each part of this. Planning a new solution, a new product, right to deploying it with the industry metaverse, or with creating digital twins, you can actually do that entire process without producing a single product or solution in your life and figure out what could be the impact. Now look at the power of all this. If sitting at home, I decide I'm a small, medium business entrepreneur sitting in a small part of the world, and I want to create a solution, and I want to figure out apart from my own geography that I want to sell this, my own country or state that I want to sell this product to, are there other opportunities globally? Now, ordinarily, that would need to happen with the potential, with you getting into consultants, getting consultants into the picture, etc. But if artificial intelligence can work with you, and I can have a simple interface which says, okay, I want to build a solution which enables students to be able to study at home without the need for going back to school if they've missed, for an extra class to school if they've missed class, right? Are there solutions like this that exist? Is there a database of education content which is available? AI can actually help pull that information and also tell you which places you could actually deploy these solutions because there are gaps. Now that's the power of technology, right? From planning, procurement, production, deployment, and then most importantly, looking at regulations, looking at laws and compliances. Can I export something from Africa to Germany? What are the FDA requirements if it's around food? What are the pharmaceutical requirements if there are? What are the engineering and safety requirements? What do I need to do to make sure that my products meet that? I can do that sitting at home. And that's the power of technology. The reason being it's more powerful right now as compared to earlier is because you can actually now converse with it without the middle person in between. I'd just like to end over here that fundamentally, what generational AI brings to the table today is something like what the printing press, electricity did long ago. The opportunity that all of us have in front of us today is to make sure that it doesn't take as long for electricity. It should not take as long as it has taken in the past for electricity or the printing press to reach every person on earth. And that's the power, that's the work that we need to do is in front of us. How do we make sure that we can do this in a safe, sustainable, secure manner?
Wow. Thank you. Generative AI compared to the printing press and electricity. A fascinating concept. And so let's turn then to Alyssa, who can apply this to her sector. During the pandemic, there was a lot of attention paid to the pharmaceutical supply chains and some of the hiccups associated with that. How is AI helping the pharma sector supply chains benefit both in the development side, the delivery side, develop critical drugs and deploy critical drugs as Ashutosh talked about, planning, procurement, production, deployment, digital twins? Go for it, Alyssa.
Thanks so much. It's great to be able to talk about this topic. I think sometimes, as Ashutosh said, or as you said, Susan, it's sometimes forgotten that industries outside of the traditional tech sector are so dependent and so already really taking advantage of these technologies in really important ways, and in our case for human health. So, AI, it's also, ChatGPT certainly shook up the world and everyone's suddenly paying attention to AI, but for life sciences, and I suspect many other sectors, AI has, been part of the life sciences community for a long time. We've long understood that technology represents an incredible opportunity to change the course of global health. So let me just give you a couple of examples of how we've been using AI, and I think you'll readily see that it's really embedded, as Ashutosh said, into everything that we do. So let me start with drug discovery, because of course, without drug discovery, we can't get medicines to patients. And AI in drug discovery is being used in a number of ways to accelerate the process. So today we use AI to understand the causes of diseases so we can identify the best place in a disease process for a medicine to intervene. We're using AI to optimize our medicines and to find and design the best molecules to stop or slow down disease progression without interfering with other biological processes. And we're using the technology to identify predictors of patient response and analyze data to find biomarkers for how different patient types will respond to a medicine. And I would also point out that AI and machine learning allow us to screen large numbers of candidate molecules to identify those for further investigation by our chemists. And this has really been crucial in accelerating drug development, including when we were working to help respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially with our oral therapeutic. The AI technologies on targeting the best, most promising molecules were really crucial to help us, find the most promising ones and get them into the labs as quickly as possible. Now, let me say a word about manufacturing and delivery, because there again, AI plays a critical role for us in making our supply chains more resilient, more efficient, and more nimble. So I would say, first of all, it starts with digitalization. We had an industry-first digital operations center, which allows our colleagues to collaborate across plants. They see production status and resolve issues in real time. And this alone has yielded a 20% throughput increase. So this is really now at the heart of how our plants operate, and it's just a reminder of how important digital and data flows are to the day-to-day work that we all do in manufacturing. But in distribution, let me give you a couple examples of how AI has really enhanced our work. During the pandemic, our mRNA prediction algorithm yielded 20,000 more vaccine doses per batch. So this is the algorithm that we deployed across our manufacturing footprint to help us find the most efficient way to produce the vaccines. And 20,000 more doses per batch is really, this is part of the reason why we were able to go from no vaccines to, 3 billion doses in 2021 and 4 billion in 2022. And I have to tell you, that scale prior to COVID-19 was unimaginable. We are a vaccine making company, and our previous manufacturing capacity of vaccines was 220 million doses a year of a vaccine that was a known technology. So to go from 0 to 3 billion in such a short period of time is, I think it's astounding. And no doubt the AI has helped play a part in optimizing our manufacturing processes. So another area where we've used AI in our supply chain was in pandemic response, but also we have used it to mitigate disruptions from natural disasters. So we have applied AI to generate proactive alerts regarding events that could potentially disrupt our supply chain. So these alerts, they empowered Pfizer colleagues to intervene in advance of Hurricane Ian's landfall in 2022, which ensured we could reroute shipments in order to continue delivering critical medicines and vaccines to clinical trial sites. These tools are constantly improving as we train the data models, and as is the resultant accuracy. And this is a very exciting area of supply chain for us. Innovations in data, and Ashutosh alluded to this as well, they can also be a logistics enabler. So for example, we were using GPS thermal sensors for real-time tracking of our ultra-cold shipments of vaccines. So it's just another illustration of how really this technology is making our processes better from start to finish. And there's so much more that I think the future holds for us. But anyway, those are a few perspectives from life sciences.
Thank you, Alyssa. And I suspect we'll have more questions. I certainly have more questions about the application of the technologies, because it sounds like this has sort of been accelerating the use and the applications, and the scope of the applications has been accelerating really dramatically, and particularly since COVID. So I may come back to you. I may come back to you on that. Joanna, So you've been very much engaged in the WTO's digital trade work. And I'm curious about what you see as the connection between trade and AI. And I obviously alluded to that, or certainly my thoughts on that. The real question here, best question to be focused on right now here in this venue, what is the role, potential role of the WTO in enabling the uptake and the regulation of AI to achieve the best possible outcome? Because there's some downsides. We recognize that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Schwab, for hosting this panel, and FTC for the invitation. And yes, as the other panelists have been alluding, the rapid adoption of AI and its impact on supply chains and on trade, in the present and what we foresee in the future, have really encouraged us to speed up the work, especially on the research side, on, what will AI mean for trade and what can trade mean for AI, right? As you say, both in the positive aspects, but also taking into account the risks. On the trade side, we do see that AI will dramatically reduce trade costs. And this includes everything from overcoming language barriers and improving supply chain management to simplifying compliance with trade regulations. For instance, AI can make traceability more affordable, reliable, and accessible for small businesses that struggle to meet regulatory and import requirements. That is really something I think that many development agencies struggle with, how to help farmers or small enterprises deal with all these ever increasing regulatory requirements. AI will probably drive increased demand for AI related goods and services and lead to the creation of entirely new ones. It has the potential to reshape countries' comparative advantages and alter global trade patterns. And finally, AI will probably influence how we view creative work and the protection of intellectual property rights. So as it is now a global phenomenon affecting the way we work, live, and trade, we need to make sure that the rise of AI doesn't negatively impact trade flows and erode the gains from trade that countries have worked so hard on. So a rules-based international trading system at the same time can also support development and use of AI, making AI-related goods, services, and technology more accessible. And there are already rules in place for this. So, for example, the ITA or the GATS already play a very important role here, or the general disciplines of the GATS and the GATT and how they apply to AI-enabled products and services. The WTO provides a forum for discussion and exchange on regulatory approaches to AI. And importantly, making sure that trade helps members that have not so far benefited from globalization build their own AI capacity to foster economic growth through trade. So, which combination or what combination can we come up with where AI and international trade can lead to inclusive outcomes, as this public forum is encouraging us to think about? So against this background, what are we doing at the WTO and the Secretariat on AI? Our members, WTO members, are very much aware of the potential impact of AI on various aspects of trade and already are having or considering having discussions and thematic sessions within the TRIPS Council and the Council of Trade and Services and the TBT Committee. And these discussions obviously are primarily aimed at identifying the issues that are at the intersection of AI and trade, sharing insights and best practices where they exist. And questions of AI have also been surfacing as one of the potential topics for discussions as part of the e-commerce work program. I'd also like to mention the stabilized text of the Plurilateral Agreement on e-commerce, and it doesn't contain specific disciplines on AI, but it does facilitate trade by electronic means, which might cover then AI-related goods and services. And the Secretariat is, of course, supporting members in these efforts. As some of you may know, our Director General recently announced the creation of a digital trade and Frontier Technologies unit. And we hope that this unit will provide members with even better levels of expertise and support. The Secretariat has also been organizing workshops on the impact of AI in different aspects of trade, such as supply chain operations that we're discussing today. Last but not least, we are preparing our first ever WTO report, entirely focused on the question of the interplay between trade and AI. And it will explore how AI may shape the future of international trade policy and examine some of those key trade-related questions. We will be launching the report at an event on November 21st here in our headquarters. And we hope it will be a one-day event with policymakers, industry leaders, and scholars that can help us delve down deeper into all of these issues.
Terrific. Johanna, thank you very much, and more to come, and more questions on that, and some questions that I don't think can wait until November 21st. So I'll be coming back to you on this. Torbjorn, let me turn to you from a development perspective. What are the key issues that developing countries need to be keeping in mind as they approach AI deployment, balancing uptake and protecting their interests? You and I had a brief conversation before we came up here, and I was asking the questions, or I was asserting, actually, be more to the point, that AI, I felt, could be, or generative AI, a really great leveler for small businesses and smaller economies when it comes to supply chains, but recognize that it could also exacerbate a digital divide if it isn't managed properly. So I'd be very curious about how you come out on that, how you see the development side of this very important equation.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also big thanks to NFTC for allowing UNCTAD on this interesting panel. And also a big thank you through Johanna to WTO for having organized a great public forum this year. Really great. Okay, so let me start by saying that even also in UNCTAD, we are on a learning curve when it comes to AI. Unfortunately, the uptake of knowledge about AI is not as fast as the uptake of ChatGPT. I think there's little doubt that the adoption of AI technologies can help make supply chains and also manufacturing processes more efficient and help address also various global development challenges beyond this domain. AI can induce various economic, environmental, and social benefits, also in several other domains, such as medicine, as you mentioned, and the weather forecasting, for example. The expansion of AI in the past decade is the result of, and has also been stressed, greatly expanded volumes of data that can be fed into algorithms in AI, and it has greatly expanded computing power for generating insights from data, because data on their own cannot do that much if you don't have the power to actually turn them into something that is in some form intelligent, for example, through large language models. But let me also add some other perspectives to this discussion, notably with regard to the inclusiveness and the environmental dimensions of AI. And I think this is important to keep those aspects also in mind when we think about what we need to build resilience and an inclusive policy ecosystem in this area. So taking you up there, Susan, on the widening or the existing divides that we have enormous divides in the world still when it comes to digitalization, and we cannot do away with them. And we were comparing recently this question about electricity and ChatGPT. Well, in many African countries, electricity is still a problem. So we haven't really solved all the problems there. And I'm thinking, the question is here really, will the adoption of AI and the rollout across the world in the value chains lead to reduced divides, or will it be widening divides? And the sense that we have in UNCTAD when we do our analysis from a developing country perspective is that digitalization has so far, especially with the increasingly data-driven digitalization, has widened the divide, simply because just having data does not do the trick. You need to be able to do something with the data. So it's very much linked to the skill situation and the power to do something with it. And I was discussing with someone right before this session about leapfrogging. And we always hope that digitalization will be the key to leapfrog for the countries that are far behind. But I'm worried that with AI, what we will see leapfrogging is between the ones that are really advanced, because they have the power to use something, do something with the data. So you could have widening divide as a result. The ILO has recently stressed that the AI divide that is emerging, where high-income nations disproportionately benefit from AI advancements, while low and medium-income countries, particularly in Africa, lag behind. And that this divide will grow unless concerted action is taken to foster international cooperation in support of those countries that are far behind. The absence of such policies will not only widen global inequalities, but risks squandering the potential that we're talking about AI as a catalyst for widespread social and economic progress. And let me just share a few illustrations here. If you look at the top 10 AI research institutions in terms of producing the best papers, research papers on AI, number 1 is Google. Number 2 is MIT, 3 Stanford, 4 Carnegie Mellon, UC Berkeley, and number 6, Microsoft. Then comes Oxford, Tsinghua University, then comes Facebook or Meta, and then on 10th position is UCLA. Among the top 25, there is not one single institution from the European Union. There are some from Switzerland, some from the UK, but no one from the EU. If we look at the top elite AI researchers in the world, 7 out of 10 are in the US and China. And if you look at the 100 top companies in a recent ranking in the area of AI, only 3 entries are not from the OECD or China. There's 1 from Russia, 1 from Vietnam, and 1 from India, Tata Institute. This kind of illustrates that where we have talked about the other industries and so on, there's been more equal distribution of where the automotive you find in all parts of the world, electronics and so on. But AI, the data-driven economy, is very concentrated. You need very specific skills to be able to develop it well. The other side is, of course, how to use the AI. And there could be more widespread use. But I think we cannot also ignore who is producing the solutions in the AI world. Let me also say a few words about the environmental footprint of AI. And this is now that I know that all the big digital platforms are well aware of, because there's growing attention to this in your world. We recently published our digital economy report, where we put the spotlight on the environmental footprint of digitalization and where AI really stands out, because it has in the very last few years added a lot to the energy needs, the electricity needs for the data centers. And this is very much linked to not only AI, but especially generative AI, which is very compute intensive. So this adds more need for electricity, and it adds more need for water for cooling the data centers. I read somewhere that for Microsoft, just the training of the GPT-3, the precursor to the ChatGPT, training in the US, it required 700,000 liters of potable water. Someone calculated that. And according to the International Energy Agency, the electricity consumption by data centers globally will rise from around 460 terawatt hours in 2022 to more than 1,000, to more than double by 2026. This is more than France and Germany together consume in 1 year. So I think we need to keep this in mind. Of course, when it comes to emissions, the key question is how do we source the energy for these data centers? If all is renewable, that is less of a problem from an emission perspective. But if it crowds out other parts of the economy using this electricity, it still creates a problem if we don't add more renewable energy. And I just want to end here with a reflection on the situation in Ireland.
Thank you. You raise a whole series of questions that I'd like to tee off my next round of questioning on the accessibility, inclusiveness issues that you raised. I mean, for example, we start, and I think my next set of questions will have to do with WTO rules, but one of the issues on the energy consumption topic that you raise, when we're talking about one of the hot issues of debate has to do with forced localization. When we're talking about data and digital flows, forced localization will ramp up the energy costs associated with generative AI dramatically. So again, this is where we start getting into a conversation about the juxtaposition of WTO principles, for example, with our environmental objectives and obligations to this planet. But I want to go, you raised a couple of questions that I suspect Ashutosh would like to perhaps comment on in terms of the accessibility, inclusiveness question, leapfrogging, and the environment. Hey, go for it.
All right. So no, I think these are excellent questions to have. And I think we are at this stage at a point where, thankfully, we are looking at the opportunities, and we are also possibly much more enlightened about what could exacerbate the divides, right? And I think that's a good position to be in, because that's what's required, which is an intentional conversation about what should be the policies, regulations that we need to bring into place, so that while we can, be cognizant about the benefits that this technology, or any technology actually, right from the time when we discovered fire, brings to the table, we make sure that we have those policies which ensure that you have it done in a sustainable, secure, safe, and inclusive manner, right? So let me start with the sustainable thing part as such, right? Because it actually, yes, more data centers will absorb water. They will take electricity. They will cause a lot of other issues in terms of landfills, etc. So how do we make sure that we try and address this? There are two parts to it. One is technology on its own, or AI on its own, can start measuring the impact of this and what can be done to create better and better solutions to address that, in terms of right from the investment in green building materials, creation of green energy, right? The second piece to this is, how can we make sure that as we start looking at setting up more data centers, we also establish the regimes that those data centers need to be green. And those are the regulations that need to come into place, right? How can we start looking at, and for example, in Microsoft, we have this concept of now the blue economy within our data centers, where we start saying, how can we reuse or recycle the servers that we have? So it actually goes through, so we don't discard them, right? So start looking at that. The third piece to this is, to the point that you talked about, is we don't really need data localization, right? How can we look at data centers that are established, where every organization, every country can make sure that they can actually use the cloud or hyperscale cloud benefits that way? Now, we understand that there are going to be sovereignty issues, there are going to be safety and security issues. So that's where the regulations come in, that there needs to be the sovereign control, ability to control that data. There needs to be the ability to make sure that that data isn't leaked out or things of that sort, and there are secure processes. But at the same time, recognizing the fact that every neighborhood doesn't really require a data center. There are ways and means by which you can make that applicable. Plus, how can you ensure what we call the access principles, where you don't get locked down to a data center? That's another concern that a lot of people have, that if I am on a Microsoft cloud, can I move to another cloud? Can I move from a government cloud to a Microsoft private cloud? I think that's where, again, regulations come into the picture, which allow this seamless transfer from one to another. I don't know if we have that in Switzerland, but for example, in India, if I have a SIM card belonging to a particular telecom provider, I can actually transfer my telecom provider from one to the other without a break in service. I think that's the type of a concept. So there are whole sort of things to address that sustainability. Then we come to and that also links up to the issue of to accessibility, right? How do we make sure it's inclusive? And for that, we, I think, so need to understand what the tech stack is all about. There's infrastructure, there's the software and the solutions, there are the skills on top of it. And we need to address all these three stacks to make it easily available, right? The fact of the matter is, we still don't have parts of the world where electricity exists. But the other fact is that we know now that if we have situations where electricity doesn't exist, we should make sure that we don't create a situation where we create policies that only the rich get it: electricity, the printing press, or AI. So how do we make sure that, and there could be various modalities, business models, there could be financial models to ensure that you actually get this technology down to the last mile. You still will need electricity, but maybe you can use solar for that. But there are various ways. But I think the point that I'm trying to make, and Torbjörn, you raised it very well, that we know what the pitfalls can be, and there are solutions. We may not have all the solutions today, but we can definitely work towards that.
Can I just quickly offer just on this environmental question, because from our experience at Pfizer, that one thing, just to illustrate, Susan, your point about localization, when we did a cloud migration of all our IT, core IT in 2021, and we went from 10% to 80% in the cloud. And actually, as a result of that process, we were able to exit 3 data centers, which saved 4,700 tons of carbon emissions. So I absolutely take your points. I think it's a complicated environment. Certainly the localization piece would seem to make it more difficult for companies to achieve that kind of savings. Anyway.
But what I'm hearing you say is that generative AI can be accessible to anyone in the world who has access to electricity. They don't have to have a data center.
Oh, they don't.
Right. They need a mobile phone, right? They need access to a mobile phone.
That's right.
Okay.
Maybe a smartphone.
A smartphone. Okay. All right. I want to continue along this line though, because let's stay with this for a brief time, on development and engagement of supply chain partners, and the extent to which and how one goes about, if you are a smaller economy or you are a smaller business, taking advantage of the benefits of generative AI to be a part of a supply chain that perhaps you might not have been able to before. And I'm curious both from a business side, but also when you're thinking about WTO principles that might facilitate that, or trade protectionist actions that might preclude that. Before I go to questions from our audience, I would appreciate. Yes.
So I think, again, there's a question of, is it half full or half empty, the glass? But the fact that we are increasingly, and it's not only through AI, it's basically to rely more on data for supply chains and for the organizational work and relying on sensors from all around the world. Like Caterpillar, they have their data center here in Geneva. And they had to recruit, you know, this is a manufacturing company, but they had to recruit scientists from CERN to be able to make use of this data. So it's not something just because you have access to the data, you can turn it into productivity improvement. You need a lot of investments in that. And when you have a strong leader of a supply chain that has it, like Pfizer, you have many, many suppliers down the line that have to comply with the requirements that you set for your supply chain so that it fits well with the data that you need to be able to control this supply chain and make sure that it's as efficient as possible. That means that the lead firm, in this case Pfizer, is the company that controls all the data in a sense. All the other players there, they control their own data, but not the whole supply chain's data. So it also creates power for the biggest players in every supply chain. And if you cannot meet the requirements of any supply chain, you can say that AI can, if you can meet them, it may qualify you to participate, but if you don't, you may not be able to. So there can still be an inclusive aspect and an exclusive aspect, depending on how you're able to cope with it.
But isn't it, with the examples that you're giving, isn't AI potentially enabling in a way that the absence of AI would make it even harder and more expensive for smaller players to be engaged because they wouldn't have access to that data and they wouldn't have access to anything that would enable them to process that data?
I think it can go both ways. It depends. I mean, it's not the either or, it depends.
Can I add to that? And I'll give an example. Something we've been talking about the last 2 days around cybersecurity and trust, building trust, right? So we all know that, you know, forget national security issues related to cyber, right? You have phishing attacks which happen on us as individuals, you have it on organizations, you have it on small and medium businesses. Typically, everybody has got to protect themselves against these cyber phishing attacks. And what you do is you have cybersecurity professionals sitting over there. Now, depending upon the level of capabilities of those cybersecurity professionals, they build their cyber capacity. One of the things that we figured out, and we created something called a co-pilot, a security co-pilot, which actually helps do to a large extent, the mundane job which a cybersecurity professional needs to do. Now, what it does is that, you know, when a cyber attack happens, typically the cybersecurity professionals start figuring out where the attack has happened, which ports are attacked, etc., and what to shut down, who to tell within the network system, what to do, etc. And that takes time. A co-pilot helps you just do that in a jiffy and gives, and thus what happens is from information to intellect to insights to action, you actually automate that entire process, right? And hence the cybersecurity professional that you have now actually has more time to look at what needs to be remediated to a large extent. Now, to the point that Torben raised, I think it's extremely important that if I have supply chain requirements, it's not just about telling me what those supply chain requirements is, getting the information, but the insights to what I can do to then change in my product processes to address that. So you're right, it's a glass half full, glass half empty. But here, the way I would look at it is that I now have possibly a slightly far more intelligent system, which can help me tell me what to do in a faster way. There will still be the divides. What we need to ensure is that those divides can keep coming closer and closer. That's the way I would actually approach it.
Johanna, speak to us about WTO principles might be applicable in all of
I think
this.
many of the WTO actual agreements are applicable, and looking at it through the lens of development, I think is very important. And looking at it through the, starting with the digital divide, I think that's something that at the WTO we have encountered in different types of discussions and conversations. And that's why it's so important that the Global Aid for Trade Review, this has been an important issue that has looked at. And the e-commerce work program is also focusing a lot on this. And we, in our partnerships with the World Bank and other institutions, are doing work on that side, because we do recognize the importance of narrowing that digital divide so that countries and people can take advantage of all the digital opportunities, and of course, anything that comes along with AI. But the agreements themselves can help developing countries, adapt faster and close that digital divide. We think that, for example, the ITA is an important agreement to lower tariffs on ICT products, because lowering them would enhance the capacity to leverage AI for development. And, trade is so important because it not only moves goods and services, it moves knowledge, right? It moves technology, it moves idea and know-how. So by keeping trade channels open, we help disseminate technology and build skills in developing countries. And this equally applies to AI. And let me give you a couple of examples. The TRIPS agreement, it reflects a balance, right, between an IP system that not only incentivizes innovation, but also promotes access to and dissemination of technology. And for developing countries, this is incredibly important. And since 2019, a few developed countries, including Canada, the EU, Switzerland, and the US, have reported several AI technology transfer programs. And third, another way to disseminate knowledge and technology in trade is through foreign direct investment. And foreign investors bring in new technology, but they also train local staff in how to use that technology. So initiatives like the recently concluded Plurilateral Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement, concluded by 3/4 of the WTO membership, can help foster this process. And I think that, going ahead, there is a lot that can be done here at the WTO, and members are, of course, analyzing all these different opportunities, starting with possibilities at the work program on e-commerce, what discussions can be had. And as we said, in the case of the digital divide, we're working with the World Bank on the Digital Trade in Africa initiative that's looking at hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. And we can probably hope that there will be more aid for trade projects with an AI dimension that can, help leverage AI to enhance business intelligence and facilitate expanding to new markets and upskilling local workforce and improving logistics and supply chain. I could go on and on. But we do at this institution have many opportunities for collaboration amongst members, but also with institutions like UNCTAD, who's doing such important work on digital for development.
Thank you very much. And I am going to take the privilege of the chair, since you raised the work program question, and I'm going to turn to Ambassador Richard Brown and to speak. Where are you? There you are, and ask you to speak to us, enlighten us about the work program associated with e-commerce, because I think this is an important component of this conversation. And then I am going to come back to this panel for quick closing comments. If we have time for other questions, I will do that as well. But Ambassador Brown, please enlighten us.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Swab, for this opportunity to comment on the work program, and also for this very insightful discussion this afternoon. I think it has quite stimulated my understanding of the various issues, certainly on the supply chain considerations. Just to put it into context, I think first it's important to recognize that AI can play a transformative role in digital industrialization, which is one of the key mandates that we have from the current work program coming out of MC13, particularly in creating value in relation to facilitating the management of supply chains. But we recognize that increasingly the gains that come from adopting AI and other frontier technologies are increasingly concentrated in a few hands, in a few large companies located in a few countries. And I think that creates a number of challenges for developing countries. Developing countries are facing a lot of constraints in terms of resource capacity, capacity constraints, regulatory constraints. And so that is further compounded, I believe, by the high concentration of AI development activity, the unprecedented speed at which technology is evolving, which is likely to further exacerbate the current digital divide that we're observing. So I think in the context of this discussion, in terms of seizing the opportunities that AI opens up, it would require a new ecosystem, I think, to support the use and development of AI, including developing, adopting both hard and soft infrastructure, developing adequate skills and digital literacy, putting in place an appropriate regulatory framework as well to address the risks that come with AI, such as the ethical concerns and risks related to privacy and cybersecurity. So that turns the discussion, I think, on the regulatory aspect of the discussion. And there are various regulatory tools, I think, that exist that can help developing countries to build capacity to capitalize on the opportunities presented by AI. So I think looking forward, what the WTO can do, I think, for the WTO, how we can help developing countries to build capacity is one of the key questions that are at the forefront of this consideration, and to put in place innovative approaches and tools to help them to seize the opportunities that AI opens up. And of course, what can we do to create, with existing frameworks, to respond to the emergence of frontier technologies like AI? In the context of the work program on e-commerce, the work program offers WTO members a forum to discuss trade-related issues related to digital trade. It also looks at concerns in relation to it provides a forum to look at the concerns in relation to the disruptive impact that AI and other frontier technologies can have on trade diversion, comparative advantage, employment, business models, and development strategies in particular, which could lead to deepening the digital divide. So one of the objectives of the work program is really to offer an opportunity for members to look closely at the intersection between AI and digital trade, and give a space, I think, to share national and regional experiences and to discuss relevant policy issues related to the subject. And these discussions, we hope, will lead to reassessing the way in which we address new and emerging issues as it relates to AI. So the discussions under the work program can benefit, of course, from a reflection on how the WTO can be more responsive to the ever-changing trade landscape, and perhaps how the work program itself can be reshaped and refashioned to accommodate these and other new developments in the future. So that's one of the things that we want to emphasize, that we see that the work program can do more to respond to the current globalized environment that we're in, the digitalized environment that we're operating within, and the fact that the future of trade is digital. So we have to create a space where we can actually continue to engage on this particular topic beyond what the current limitations of the work program now suggest, which is 2026, as we all know. So I think we want to create an opportunity where the WTO can play a significant role in shaping this global environment. But of course, we know that the implications of AI go beyond trade, and so we want to also incorporate the views of other international organizations, other international players and partners, private sector, consumer groups, NGOs, in a broader discussion around this particular topic to ensure that we have a valuable and rich set of recommendations and policy options going forward. So that's one of the focuses that we have for the work program, is to identify perhaps a set of policy recommendations and guidelines that can assist member states in terms of how they develop their regulatory architecture to respond to this new environment. And of course, as it relates to the moratorium issue, to provide some policy options that member states can consider in terms of how they can treat with this environment post 2026, where it would sort of be a kind of wild, wild west environment where you have the option of choosing customs duties or internal taxes or no form of measures at all. So that's going to be a significant consideration, I think, going forward. So we want to create an environment where we can have a clear understanding of the policy options that member states can put in place to respond to these challenges. Thank you.
Ambassador Brown, thank you very much for your contribution here, for your work and engagement, leadership on the work program. And as I mentioned to you before, you can be certain that the business community group that the National Foreign Trade Council has had here in Geneva, all of the conversations we've had about the e-commerce moratorium have also been conversations about engagement with the work program and being constructive in that capacity. And I agree with you entirely. All the future of commerce is digital, and that includes the future of manufacturing commerce. It is very hard to differentiate at this point. Let me, as we're about to run out of time, I see. I promised we would have a hard stop. Each of my panelists has exactly 1 minute for a closing remark, comment, statement. Let me invite you to begin, Torbjorn, and we'll run the line here.
Thank you very much. I think from a global perspective, we see it as increasingly important to consider how digitalization broadly, but including AI, of course, will impact not only on socioeconomic outcomes, but also on the environment. We see that this is a vastly understudied area. We need better data. We need better understanding of the implications, both the positive opportunities and the challenges. And finally, to do this well, I think we need a strong involvement of governments, international organizations, civil society, as well as the large digital corporations in order to find the best responses and find the best solutions that are possible to implement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, from our standpoint, we obviously see a lot of opportunity from AI for drug discovery, for more efficiency in our supply chains, and our ability to get drugs, medicines to patients faster anywhere in the world. I think it's really some of the points about the importance of inclusivity and the importance of the ability to deploy these technologies across countries with differing levels of development is really crucial for us because, again, patients are everywhere and we want to get our medicines to them wherever they live. And so we are looking to governments to help support the kind of technical assistance that's needed for countries to be able to take full advantage of these technologies. We welcome the opportunity to talk about the regulatory environment at the WTO. It is so crucial for this organization to be a place where governments can exchange information about best practices, where we can have constructive conversations about how best to regulate the technology. And we hope that that we can build a network that is environmentally friendly, that is inclusive. And I think I agree with so many of your points. And I think that I am hopeful that at least for drug discovery and for pharmaceutical delivery, that is possible in the near term.
Thank you. As we have seen, AI and trade and development really cover such a broad area. So many institutions globally, companies. It's a global and multidimensional task that we can't do alone. And we certainly think that trade should be a part of this conversation. And what I have seen here today is that all these institutions are trying to bring their best side forward. I don't know if you can feel that. We are recognizing where some of the pitfalls are, where the dangers are. And some we haven't even spoken about, regulatory fragmentation and how that can make, and divergence can make it so much more difficult for smaller business to follow all these regulations and comply with them. And so the WTO is really well placed in some areas to cover some of these concerns, because our agreements already have principles and measures to help address. I think you mentioned, Alyssa, one of them, technical barriers to trade, a good forum because it calls for the harmonization through standards and the use of standards. It's also a great forum for governments to discuss and compare situations and cooperate. We also have the TRIPS agreement, which promotes, the protection of intellectual property rights and at the same time the diffusion of and transfer of technology. Another key element is international cooperation, and one great example given by Ambassador Brown of how the e-commerce work program can be a vehicle, a permanent vehicle or a new vehicle, if it's fashioned the way members think it should be, so that it can play a huge role in facilitating these conversations, bringing people together, and finding ways to build trust and convergence while recognizing the dangers and pitfalls, but, hoping that we can address them the best way possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Johanna. So bring us home, Ashutosh.
Thank you. So I guess also it's been said, but if we sort of acknowledge the fact that AI can be a general purpose tool to drive social economic empowerment across the globe, I think it's extremely important, as Ambassador Brown said, that we genuinely have a multi-stakeholder conversation across different facets of society, not just the developing countries, but also the people who are left behind, even in the developed countries. They need to have a seat on the table, an ability to voice the concerns and what needs to be addressed there. Acknowledge the fact that no technology comes with its pitfalls, and we are at this important juncture where we can actually see what those pitfalls are and plan for that, so that ultimately the policies help flow the benefits of this technology and the applicability of this technology down to the last person, to make sure that it's accessible, affordable, and applicable.
Well done. Please join me in thanking our panel who addressed a big topic today and tried to bring it down into the realm of manageable and thinkable and debatable. So thank you all for being here, and there's more to come on this topic, obviously, going forward. So. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Nice to catch.